kid to me. You killed that kid. 24, 25, 26.
Two police officers are standing in front of three severed toes. How did the officers and the toes end up there? That's what we're about to find out together. And trust me, it's not pretty. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new brutal criminal case. The word brutal is absolutely appropriate here. I'm warning you now. Well, of course, that depends on your standards. Statistically, there are probably a few weirdos watching me, but that still doesn't stop you from subscribing to support me. In 2006, long before apps like Tinder existed, single Americans used telephone dating services to meet people. Telemates was one of the most popular services. The concept was simple. You called a number and recorded a short voice message describing yourself and what you were looking for. Then you could listen to recordings from other singles, and if someone interested you, you could leave them a private message. Unlike modern dating apps where appearance comes first, Telemates focused on personality. People fell in love with a voice, a laugh, or a way of speaking before ever seeing the other person's face. For lonely people who struggled to meet others in real life, these services became a lifeline. That's exactly where Kenneth County met his new girlfriend, a relationship that deeply worried his mother, Caroline Lodge. Kenneth was 24 years old, but he had suffered from intellectual disabilities since birth. Even though he had served briefly in the military before returning to civilian life, he struggled to live independently. He shared an apartment with a friend in Wilmington, Massachusetts, only 15 minutes away from his mother and stepfather. In February 2006, Kenneth left home with his new girlfriend, a 47-year-old woman named Sheila LaBarre, who lived in Epping, New Hampshire. Kenneth was only supposed to spend one weekend at her house, but when the weekend ended, he never returned home, and nobody informed his family. After several days without news, Caroline contacted Kenneth's employer at a car wash. They confirmed he had not shown up to work all week. Terrified for her vulnerable son, Caroline reported him missing and called the Epping Police Department on February 24, 2006. She explained the situation and asked officers to check whether Kenneth was being held against his will at Sheila's farm. When Sergeant Sean Gallagher heard Sheila's name, he immediately recognized it, and not for good reasons. Since 1995, police had dealt with Sheila more than 20 times, mostly for domestic violence incidents involving different partners. She lived on an isolated 46-hectare property at the end of Red Oak Hill Road. To the people of Epping, she was known as an eccentric and unstable woman. Gallagher and Detective Richard Coate went to her property. The gate was locked, so they climbed over it. At first, Sheila told them Kenneth was not there. But when the officers mentioned he had been reported missing, she suddenly admitted that he actually was there. A suspicious lie. The officers asked to speak with Kenneth. Sheila first claimed he was taking a bath, but eventually she brought him to the door. Kenneth assured police he was there voluntarily and appeared physically fine. Since he was an adult, the officers left without investigating further. But the visit infuriated Sheila. 2 days later, she called the police department 3 separate times, angrily insisting officers had no right to come onto her property without a warrant. Then, on March 23rd, nearly a month later, Caroline contacted police again in a panic. Sheila had told her that Kenneth no longer lived there. According to her, he had left on his own several days earlier, and she had not seen him since. Caroline was terrified. Kenneth had the mental abilities of a 12-year-old child. If he were alone, he would never survive without help. Police repeatedly tried contacting Sheila. Finally, at around 1 a.m. on March 24, she called Sergeant Gallagher back. During the phone call, she played a disturbing audio recording. In the recording, Sheila pretended to be a judge questioning Kenneth. His voice sounded weak and muffled. She asked him if he had abused children. He answered yes. She asked if he was a pedophile. Again, he answered yes. At the end of the recording, Kenneth could be heard vomiting. Sheila coldly ordered him to stop pretending. Then she began hysterically crying and screaming, "Why? Why? Why?" before hanging up. Horrified, Gallagher and Coate decided to return to the farm later that day. When they arrived after dark, the house was completely dark. Outside, they found the remains of a burned mattress and a pile of ashes. Inside the ashes, they discovered the melted handle of a knife and a bone with flesh still attached. The property was silent. The officers knocked repeatedly, but nobody answered. Fearing the worst, they requested permission to search the area and called for backup. Eventually, they forced the front door open. At that exact moment, they heard footsteps. It was Sheila. She claimed she had been shopping and invited them inside to prove Kenneth was not there. The house was disgusting. Rabbits wandered everywhere. Their droppings covered the floors. Rotten food sat in the sink. Many of the animals appeared neglected and starving. In the basement, officers found Kenneth's sneakers. Why would he leave without his shoes? When officers asked about the bone from the ashes, Sheila casually replied, "It's either a rabbit or a pedophile." The next day, police returned with a search warrant. They found Sheila kneeling beside the ashes, covered in soot, collecting bone fragments into a Walmart bag. The large bones seen the previous day had mysteriously disappeared. At the police station, Sheila claimed Kenneth was a sexual predator, a drug addict, and had incestuous relations with his mother. None of these accusations were true. She said she had tried to save him, but eventually gave up. According to her, Kenneth left during the night while she slept. Her behavior was erratic. She cried one moment and became cold the next. Her explanations made no sense. Meanwhile, investigators discovered Kenneth's DNA throughout the house, along with large amounts of blood. Using forensic radiology and military DNA records, they confirmed the burned bone fragments belonged to Kenneth County. He had never left the farm. Sheila LaBarre had murdered him. Investigators later discovered hundreds of hours of recorded phone conversations between Sheila and numerous men. It quickly became clear Kenneth might not have been her only victim. To understand how this happened, investigators looked into Sheila's past. Sheila Bailey was born on July 4, 1958, in Fort Payne, Alabama. She grew up in an extremely abusive Baptist household. Her father was a violent alcoholic who sexually abused his daughters and invited other men to assault them as well. Her traumatic childhood caused severe mental illness. As a young woman, Sheila dreamed of becoming a country singer or model. She was considered attractive and easily gained attention from men, but her relationships quickly became violent and unstable. After a failed marriage and a suicide attempt that left her in a coma, Sheila claimed she had met God while unconscious. According to her, God had given her a mission to eliminate sexual predators. Years later, this delusion became deadly. In 1987, she met Wilfred Bill LaBarre, a respected chiropractor in New Hampshire who was more than 30 years older than her. Bill fell deeply in love with Sheila and brought her to live on his large property in Epping. Over time, Sheila became increasingly violent and controlling. She shot at Bill, forced him out of his own home, and psychologically destroyed him. In 2000, Bill suddenly died of a heart attack at age 74. Sheila quickly cremated his body and inherited his entire fortune, estimated at more than $2 million. After spending the money recklessly, Sheila eventually became broke again. That's when she started targeting vulnerable men, homeless men, disabled men, lonely men. She lured them to her isolated property with promises of love, shelter, work, and a fresh start. But once they arrived, many were abused, tortured, or disappeared completely. One confirmed victim before Kenneth was Michael Deloge, a recovering addict who vanished after moving in with Sheila. Witnesses later reported seeing Michael bruised, bleeding, and terrified before he disappeared forever. Then came Kenneth. He met Sheila through telemates in February 2006. Lonely and desperate for affection, he quickly fell in love with her. She convinced him to move to her farm. Once there, she isolated and abused him. She beat him, burned him, and psychologically controlled him. On March 17, officers encountered Sheila and Kenneth at a Walmart. Kenneth was unrecognizable. He sat in a wheelchair surrounded by diesel containers. He had lost dramatic amounts of weight. His face and hands were covered in burns, bruises, and cuts. One hand was so swollen he could barely move it. When officers tried speaking to him, Sheila aggressively interrupted and ordered him not to answer. Nobody intervened. Just days later, on March 21, 2006, Sheila stabbed Kenneth to death, dismembered his body, and burned the remains in her yard. After investigators uncovered the evidence, Sheila fled. She dyed her hair bright red, withdrew cash, and moved from hotel to hotel to avoid capture. But on April 2nd, 2006, she was arrested in Massachusetts after someone recognized her from television reports and alerted authorities. Uh, at trial in 2008, Sheila admitted killing Kenneth and Michael, claiming she was God's avenging angel. Her lawyers attempted an insanity defense, but prosecutors argued that her actions showed planning and awareness of guilt. She hid evidence, lied to police, and fled once she realized she was being investigated. The jury found her sane and guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. But the mystery did not end there. Investigators also discovered 3 severed human toes near a barn on her property. DNA testing proved they did not belong to Kenneth or Michael. To this day, nobody knows whose toes they were. Police also found unidentified bloodstains and countless recordings of conversations with unknown men. How many victims did Sheila LaBarre really have? Nobody knows. Even today, investigators fear there may still be unidentified bodies hidden somewhere on that isolated New Hampshire property.